Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome in all. Hi, as you're dialing in, if you want to drop in where you're calling in from so we can greet you and say hello. I've just enabled closed captions for this call. If you need instructions for enabling closed captions on your screen, Allison is dropping them in the chat now. Welcome in. Hi from sunny Lisbon, from Syracuse, New York, from the Bay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're calling us from Brooklyn, from Cambodia, from Ohio. Welcome to our global community. Hello from Colombia, from Canada. It's so good to get to start the month with you all. Hello in Italy and in Scotland. As I said, we've dropped in instructions for enabling closed captions. If you are dialing in and you need closed captions enabled for the call today, I've activated those on my screen, and there's instructions for enabling them on your side there as well, since just dropped those in the chat. Welcome, everyone, to Remake's monthly community call. For those of you who are new to our work at Remake, Remake is on a mission to center human rights and climate justice in the fashion industry. I'm Emily Stokel, Remake's Vice President of Advocacy and Community Engagement, and I oversee our global community engagement work, plus policy and advocacy efforts. And one of Remake's summer community engagement efforts is, of course, our No New Clothes Challenge. Drop us a note if you're taking part in No New Clothes this summer, and let us know how it's going. Every summer, we as a community take a collective 90 days to press pause on buying any new clothing. And together, our 5,800 challenge takers from around the world have saved a collective of 15,874 pounds. I was having trouble figuring out what that number would amount to, so with some Googling, I found out that it's approximately the weight of a fully loaded aircraft carrier that we have saved from waste. We believe that this reset really helps challenge takers set an intentional path forward in their fashion change-making journey. And by freeing up time and brain space that otherwise would be spent on consumption, we hope we give you the space to turn that energy instead into citizen action, using our voices and platforms to educate and advocate for a just and sustainable fashion industry. And we'll be sharing some ideas with you on the call today about how to get involved with just that. I'm seeing some folks in the chat who are saying they are on board and game for the No New Clothes Challenge 100%. They're loving it so far. This is a reminder that you can join us at any time. We've dropped the challenge link in the chat, and we would love to have you take part. This challenge also has a real impact. Not only are we preventing waste, but as I said, it is a challenge that is intersectionally connected throughout fashion industry's issues. And I'm going to turn it over to Ayesha to share a little bit more about how.
Hello, everyone, and good morning or good afternoon or evening, depending on where you're calling in from. Always so lovely to see our global community. As Emily mentioned, today we are really going to focus on climate impacts across the fashion value chain. And climate change really disproportionately impacts fashion's workers, whether in Pakistan, India, Cambodia, where a lot of our clothes are made, or whether in Ghana, where a lot of our waste streams ends up. It really is women who are disproportionately carrying the impacts of climate shocks, be it extreme heat. And so one of the things we wanted to ground this conversation is to play a quick clip from our collaborative documentary, Brandy Helville, to show you sort of why this really is people on the front lines of the climate crisis. So Allison, we'll go ahead and play that now.
From the beginning of the supply chain to the end, we're all being exploited by the same system. When you look at the women who farm, who pick cotton, When you look at garment workers, the Kai women are being exploited. You know, their bodies are being exploited. The retailers are being exploited. A lot of them are women, and some of them have no idea the impacts of it.
And I know some of you are going to be having community screenings around this documentary, especially now that there are global screenings happening. But I always think it's important for us to remember and center the people as we launch any campaign. And today, as we are talking about climate's impact, we have on the back end been working with our partner, the Labor Education Foundation, on collecting testimony from workers in Pakistan for safety and security. You'll see some of this testimony on Instagram, but we have scrubbed the names and the images of workers. And I just wanted to read one testimony that really struck me to make it very specific of what we're talking about and why this matters. So a worker in Lahore shares, "These days our conditions due to heat are really bad. It's so oppressively hot and our factory doesn't provide transportation. This is why I walk in really intense heat. There's no arrangement for water, so I have to spend money to buy cold water on the way. In the factory, there's no coolant system. Our supervisor doesn't give us permission to drink water because we are piece rate workers. He says if you drink water, you'll have to go to the restroom and take too many breaks. And so he refuses to allow us to do that. Because of this, a few days ago, I got really ill and I fainted." I'll turn it back to you, Emily, to bring our panel into the conversation.
Thank you, Ayesha and team, for setting this context. I'm going to start bringing up our panelists today. We're joined by Becca Coughlan, Remake Senior Advocacy Manager, who's going to be sharing more about the true cost of climate and its impacts on fashion workers, as well as we're joined by Ayesha Ahmad, who is a researcher and trainer on labor rights, gender-based violence, and climate justice. Thank you both so much for joining us. Becca, I'd like to open it to you first. Based on the research that you and the Remake team have done this year for our Remake Fashion Accountability Report, where are you seeing progress in terms of tackling the climate crisis, and where is more investment desperately needed?
Thank you so much, Em, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. This is obviously a huge focus of fashion. Climate impact has become one of the main focuses of much of the fashion industry, and for good reason. We know the industry is estimated to be responsible for between 2 and 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. But for a lot of the talk and goal set, fashion companies are way behind. So pulling data from our report this year, only 3 companies demonstrated that they have set both short and long-term emissions reduction targets, that they have had them approved, and that they are seeing year-on-year reductions of their emissions compared to their set baselines. 10 other companies have reported emissions reductions compared to their baselines, but have either not yet set the necessary short and long-term reduction targets or have not had them approved. Amazon and Kohl's actually had their emissions reduction commitments removed from the Science Based Targets Initiative in 2023 for not laying out their emissions targets in a timely manner. And 9 companies have neither disclosed their carbon emissions to any degree nor set any reduction goals. So fashion's scope 3 emissions, which largely come from the manufacturing process, make up around 96% of the industry's footprint. That's where the real impact happens. And we need industry organizations like ourselves need all the information that we can to get about scope 3 to get a clear picture of what progress, if any, is actually being made. Reducing scope 3 emissions is very difficult. It's one thing to switch your corporate headquarters from the grid to wind energy, for example, but it's quite another to facilitate a whole factory group switch to renewables or to help them upgrade their old or energy intensive commitment. Many factories operate in countries where coal is still king. And so it's estimated that just over $1 trillion is needed to decarbonize the fashion industry. To invest in renewable energy or efficiency upgrades, garment manufacturing and processing facilities need financial help and or assurances that fashion companies will stick around and reward them for this investment. But what we saw last year in our report is that only 15 out of the 52 companies assessed sufficiently demonstrated that they are at least even beginning to invest or financially incentivize some decarbonization projects in their supply chains, though no one's really saying how much or how they're doing this. And given the overall lack of transparency and the top-down approaches, these partnerships and programs inevitably are at risk of perpetuating the same colonial power dynamics whereby actors in the global north are dictating to suppliers in the global south without adequate financial support. What's really needed is more evidence of true partnership with suppliers who understand the local country context and the manufacturing realities on the ground. What's more is that a lot of these are mostly pilot projects and they're not scaling at the speed that we need to address the climate crisis. Some of the companies assessed are still seeing emissions increase despite their investments in decarbonization. Meanwhile, Gap, for example, lost points despite reporting decreased emissions with respect to its base year, for failing to provide updates on their initial supplier decarbonization investments and pilot projects. Without knowing how its decarbonization projects are going, we have no way of knowing if this is a temporary accident, a result of slow sales, or as a result of its interventions and assistance to its suppliers. Again, we're just not getting enough information to see what's actually going on, but what we do see is that by and large, industry emissions are still climbing. And so what the fashion industry needs is a significant investment in decarbonization that's tailored to the unique needs of each country and each factory. For a true partnership between fashion companies and suppliers, workers should really be at the table to help guide the co-creation of strategies to reduce emissions. Workers are crucial partners in the clean energy transition and need to be supported through and insulated from the effects of climate change that, as we can see, are already here. There is also a vast difference between climate mitigation, which is reducing emissions, and climate adaptation, which is helping communities affected by climate change survive and thrive. Both need to happen, but so far, there has been even less attention and investment given to adaptation measures. As we heard the testimony that Ayesha shared, in our warming and flooding world, garment workers are risking their lives to make clothing for companies that are exploiting them for profit. Research by Cornell University's Global Labor Institute echoes what Ayesha shared today, that across production centers, workers will face increased exposure to extreme heat days and flooding. And garment workers are not machines, they're people. Extreme heat exposure lowers productivity. In Dhaka, Bangladesh, for instance, workers are already experiencing their productivity decrease by 20 to 25% from May through July. And Cornell estimates that 4 countries representing around 18% of global apparel exports risk foregoing around $65 billion in export earnings in 2030, which is equivalent to a 22% decline, and nearly 1 million new jobs due to slower growth. The financial cost of these productivity risks at the brand level is estimated to be circa 5% of companies' global net operating profit after tax. So operational and thus financial resilience is intrinsically linked to worker well-being. Reducing carbon emissions, while absolutely crucial, is no longer enough in the age of climate catastrophe, not when floods or heat emergencies are already well underway. And so there's, thus a significant business imperative to mitigate and address the impacts of climate change. And as the climate crisis continues to influence weather extremes, the window of opportunity for companies to adapt is quickly closing. And what we're seeing is that most losses incurred due to climate change are passed onto frontline workers. And looking back to the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw fashion companies cancel and demand discounts on orders that had already been manufactured, citing force majeure clauses, which removes liability because of unforeseeable and unavoidable catastrophes. In supplier contracts, knowing this would result in factory closures and suppliers being unable to pay workers for already completed work. And even after this practice was exposed and condemned through the collective actions of the Pay Up campaign, this general practice in fashion is still to treat suppliers as badly as you can get away with. While companies are putting forth a set of minimum labor and environmental standards that their suppliers are legally required to uphold, there are no accompanying accountability mechanisms in place, putting brands and retailers themselves on the hook when their own poor purchasing practices compromise their suppliers' ability to do so. Companies have scored abysmally when it comes to ensuring that they have responsible exit policies or sourcing timelines that consider the needs of their suppliers. And instead, they continue to demand turnaround times that aren't possible without excessive overtime and exploitation, and then punish suppliers financially when they don't meet these capricious deadlines, even when there is extreme heat, for example. And fashion companies also don't have to pay for orders until months after the product's delivered. And are known to switch suppliers if they can find another that's charging a little bit less, with little regard to consequent labor and human rights impact. Piling all of this risk onto suppliers while fashion companies handle the marketing from their shining HQs was arguably the point of outsourcing to countries in the global south in the first place. There's no downside for companies and their executives in this system. All the risk is borne by the factories and garment workers. And it's only going to get worse for these supply chain communities as global temperatures continue to rise and extreme weather events linked to climate change occur more frequently. Fashion companies will inevitably continue to invoke things like force majeure, calling these extreme weather events unforeseeable, unavoidable, and know that they are under no legal obligation to share in the pain with their suppliers and help them get back on their feet. They're able to refuse payments or impose discounts for orders delayed by climate shocks. And I'll pass it now back to Emily and Ayesha A, who I think will expand upon these negative impacts further. I know that was a lot for everyone. We do have a piece of programming on emissions coming out later this month, which I think Alison has just shared in the chat.
Thank you, Becca, for sharing that context as well as some research so that this can be the first place that you start with learning about these issues, and we hope we can give you a place to dig deeper and learn more. As Becca shared, these issues are linked together, and whenever this supply chain experiences losses, whether it's from the pandemic or whether it's from disaster related to the climate emergency, those losses are always passed along to frontline workers who bear the brunt with low-rate piecework wages, delayed wage payments, wage theft. We also see a rise in short-term contracts, hiring and firing of workers, and a rise in gender-based violence in these circumstances as well. We're glad to have Ayesha A joining us today to add another layer to our intersectional conversation. At Remake, we often discuss how these issues of human rights and climate impact are intersected, but also of the 70 million highly skilled garment workers in this workforce, 80% approximately are women of color who not only face these shrinking wages, the precarious work conditions, and are on the front lines of the climate impacts, particularly heat and floods, but also experience gender-based violence. Ayesha, I appreciate you being here with us today, and we're looking forward to learning more from you. Can you share more with us about your work in gender-based violence in the garment sector and the connection that it has to increasing heat and climate impacts?
Thank you for the invite, and my apologies in advance because my internet connection is a bit weak. So I'm in the northern side of Pakistan, as you can see, sitting in a tent. So I have this internet connection problem, which I tried to fix before the call, but apologies. I might turn off the camera if if the signals get lost in between. So well, yes, I have recently, I'm apart from some researches, I'm constantly doing the trainings with the garment factory workers, and of course, belonging to the global south, I'm directly in contact with the impacts of climate, and as I'm in touch with the garment workers, I can give you an insight from the global south sitting here. And I can share in the link or later on via email with you a write-up that was published by War on Want that also touches upon this issue, the impact of climate on the garment workers. So I would begin with this historical background of the global south, especially this Indus Valley civilization that that has this strong and rich history. And we say that the marriage of cotton and South Asia, it dates back to 6000 BC. Cotton fiber was spun for the first time here in Indus Valley civilization, and it was the most fertile plain of the world. And this basically set forth the foundation of this textile journey that is still in continuation, that is still importing from the global south. And we have some figures here. Pakistan is amongst the first 10th, amongst the 10th largest producers of cotton, exporting 3.4 billion US dollars worth of it. And more than 60% of Pakistan's total exports are the garment ones. So we have this close connection. And of course, the garment sector got really affected by this recent climatic condition. Pakistan, by the way, is amongst the most vulnerable of all the South Asian countries in our region when we talk about the climate change. So why? Because, and that's the reason we asked the brand sitting in Global North, the Global North, to pay for the reparations regarding these losses, because it has this historical context, and I would like to touch upon that because we already have. I see that we have links, and we already have the statistical data in front of us, how many are impacted, when and where. So when we start off with the historical context, we see that we have this long history. This region, South Asia, has this long history of hundreds of years of colonialism, and the British Empire, it erased not only our indigenous orientations, but it changed the course of the rivers. So we have this history of loot and plunder, and we have this history of mining, and they had those trade routes. And this is precisely, this long history of hundreds of years is basically the reason that has turned our fertile land into these pillars of concrete, and that has brought in the irreversible changes in our climate. So now we see the glacial meltings. Now we see, because we don't have those arid plains anymore. So it is all linked to the history. And now this global South, which was catering the demand of the colonizer at that time, we are still in the new colonized times, and it is now catering the demands of the white market there. I mean, we are producing for the brand sitting there. So it is still continuing. It hasn't ended yet. So the journey is still on. So that's why we believe that brands are more responsible. When we talk about our climate change, we are ultimately going to talk about the just transition. We're not just going to be talking about brands being responsible when they talk about low carbon emissions, when they talk about the green economy or the sustainability. We would also, from the global south, want to bring into perspective this thing that the workers here, the brands owe this to us, especially to the garment workers here. So when in Pakistan, more than, it's estimated that 10 million Pakistani families are reliant upon, when we talk about the supply chain. So 10 million families are reliant upon the cotton production. And 2022 floods, in those floods, 45% of the cotton crop was washed away, totally washed away. And of course, their houses were washed away, the cattle were washed away, the cotton crops were washed away, and these floods, they affected 33 million people here in Pakistan. And we can still see the impacts. We'll be talking about the impact of the COVID as well. So it has these deep layers. And then again, we need to when we talk about the decarbonization, when we talk about the degrowth, we're not talking about the degrowth for South, we're talking about the degrowth for North and growth for South. We still need it because we are far behind because of this long history of colonization. So, and we have these non-economic losses of climate change as well. I mean, the culture, the language. So because of these displacements, because of those glacial meltings, people move from those places to to the new areas where they don't find any jobs. So we also have these non-economic losses, and for even for those reparations, we also again look back to the global north, and of course the global south. Why global north? Why especially the brands? Because brands are the ones that are getting that are profiting the most from what our workers are doing here for them. So they are accountable. We'd be talking about that. So in this question, we need to, or are you going to ask another question, Emily, on how to move forward? Is it going to be the second round of discussion when we'd be talking about especially what's going on regarding GBVH in the garment industry, or should I carry on? What do you want me to do?
Thank you for that context. We'd be happy to have you carry on, but first, Ayesha B, I wondered if you could help us to paint a picture kind of across all our communications with our worker partners about what we're hearing from them, especially this summer when it comes to heat stresses. Ayesha A has done such a wonderful job of painting the history and the context of these issues. And we'd love to hear a little bit more about what we're hearing in the here and now from our partners.
Absolutely. And thank you, Aisha, for that context, which I think history is important as we think about how do we find ourselves here. And so, as Emily noted, we have been in a conversation with many of our worker partners around this summer, especially with temperatures at an all-time record high. In India, hearing from Amazon warehouse workers, but also Kutso workers noting how long the hours are in the unbearable heat, and also noting that you may have access to coolant systems in the workplace, sometimes not, but certainly not in communities. And so recognizing that when we are talking about extreme heat, this is about workers' whole self and their impacts. In Cambodia, some of our partners are conducting some interesting research that we will be sharing with you all this fall. But the early findings of this research show that workers in unionized factories that have bargaining rights in place fare far better to advocate for protections against heat stress than those without those agreements in place. Again, really understanding the intersections that labor rights, human rights, and the climate crisis are connected. In Pakistan, as I noted, we've been collecting testimonies, and one of the things we've noted is that many factories, particularly the smaller factories, do not have coolant systems, and those are expensive. And the question becomes, who pays for these coolant systems? What we've heard from workers time and time again across South Asia is that the factory workplaces are already hot. The machines are hot. You have a lot of people packed into the assembly line, and now, because of record temperatures, we're seeing an increased instance of fainting, of dizziness, of health concerns, but these are not being tabulated and collected as directly correlated to the climate crisis, which is really important for us to bubble this up and call it what it is. The final thing that we've been hearing is, there isn't a lot of infrastructure set up. So a lot of the transportation is either on foot, a mix between that and public transportation. Not all workers are provided transportation. And so by the time they're arriving for their 10, 12-hour shift, it's already very dehydrating. And then between power cuts, not having access to the grid, that when you are home, you are again dealing with heat in a way that is unmanageable, and those impacts on children and the family. And this is why, Ayesha Ahmad, I wanted to turn it back to you to really make it clear for our community around why we see this rise in gender-based violence when we see extreme heat events.
This is the correct observation in your part. In the factories, even they don't have the exhaust fans. They are, in Pakistan, the factories are big. You would find 4,000 workers, 8,000 workers. Some big factories have somewhere around 20,000 workers. So there are these halls in which they're packed closely together, and you don't see them as humans. They are the kind of extensions of the machines, standing close to each other. You won't see them as humans. And then they're doing overtime for, they don't work for 8 hours. They work for 10 to 12 to 14 to at times 16 hours. Recently, we resolved a case where the factory workers were factoring till 4 a.m. in the morning since 9 a.m. So that's the case. And the energy is already exhausted. So because the machines are already, I mean, all the operations are going number wise. So if one worker takes the break of having water or needs to go to the restroom, the whole operation gets disturbed. So they don't allow the workers to go and have cold water, or to go and use the restroom for some time, or to go out and breathe in for some time. It is really, really, really hot, somewhere around 50 degrees here. So that is too hot. So whenever I visit a factory floor, I realize how difficult it is to work in that factory floor. I mean, from outside, we cannot even imagine the situation that is inside the factories. And then women, when they go back home, they are to do the unpaid care work at home. And we have the electricity problem. So the taxes have gone beyond limit on the electric bills. They cannot afford that. They cannot have the coolers or the air conditioners at home. And then they face the gender-based violence at home as well, because they belong to the families of the workers who are the marginalized people of this community. So they take out their frustration, they take out their agitation and everything on their women. So when they come back home, the women workers from the garment sector, they complain that they at times get beaten up by the husbands. They have to take care of their children and the elderly at home, and they don't have any. I mean, they live in those small houses. They don't have clean water, let alone the cold water. They don't have clean water to drink. When we talk about cold water, that's a luxury when we talk about cold water here. So the things are really, really, really bad. So I mean, there are these areas where the factories are situated in the outskirts of the cities, and behind those factory areas are the areas where they usually reside. So the water is contaminated because that's the water that gets contaminated because of the waste of the factories. So they don't have clean water to drink. They don't have then cooling systems at home. So it's really impacting their psychological health and their physical health as well, and of the children as well. So we see in the news reports that the cases of diarrhea and these diseases, malaria, typhoid, they are at a peak in these summers, in the monsoon times. And then when it's monsoon, we expect the floods as well. So things are really, the conditions are precarious for the garment sector workers, and especially, I mean, all the marginalized communities here.
Thank you for also explaining how we need to consider these issues at a systemic level throughout the worker's whole life, not just in the workplace. I want to transition us over to some solutions in a sense. I've received some questions in the chat as well that I am jotting down. Ayesha, I'd love to hear from you first, maybe if there are key interventions that you think are particularly important to highlight that do protect workers in these instances. What should be considered?
Ayesha pointed out very correctly that we don't have the system of the the collective bargaining is totally absent. So the government gives us this figure that we have the unions that are 3% of the workforce, which again is not true. So the registered or the recognized unions, we're not talking about the pocket or the yellow unions, they are less than even 1% in Pakistan. So workers' voice is almost non-existent here. So when the workers won't have a voice, how would they, ask about or even, and then they have internalized, which is something that we all need to work upon. So they have internalized that they probably deserve less. So we don't have a training mechanism. They don't even know what gender-based violence and discrimination is. They have internalized it, that they are to be abused. That's such a, I mean, the conditions are that bad. They know that it's either the supervisor or the factory manager or some person on the road while they would be going back to their home from the factory. They're bound to be harassed. I mean, they have internalized this fact that they don't deserve more. So to make them unlearn, to make them learn that they deserve better, they deserve more, they deserve better working conditions is again a challenge. So it's a taboo here talking about that they're being harassed, that they need more in terms of heat, they need to do something. They don't talk about it. They just keep it inside. They internalize it. So we need to focus more on either the trainings. I mean, we need to have more trainings via, engaging the local NGOs that are working on the labor rights. So we can have more training sessions. After those training sessions, we do see a change. Otherwise, civil society isn't as such doing anything. So we need to make a collective effort, meet more, talk more about it, and then see how can we, we don't have feminist movements here in Pakistan. We don't have unions here in Pakistan. We do have the laws, but uh, nobody knows what's written in the laws. I mean, they just lie in those law books. So the workers won't ask for their rights. They don't have the time to sit and think and talk and then move further to ask for their rights. So it's a long journey. When we talk about the global South, it's a long journey. I mean, the conditions, the political conditions, the economic conditions, the working conditions, they're really precarious. We don't have time we just need to think about providing food to our children before they go to bed at night. We cannot think anything beyond that. Things are that bad here. So, I mean, we talk about climate change, they don't see it as a problem. The workers ask this question: what is climate change? That climate is not nothing that concerns us. I mean, and to make them unlearn, we've started with Labor Education Foundation, we've started training on the just transition for the workers in the garment factory. And it's a great step. We need more steps in that pattern.
Thank you for sharing that and for the need for the immediate support as well. Ayesha Ahmad, I think, is going to share a little bit more with us about what Remake is doing to try to mobilize some of that immediate support for workers now. There is also an urgent need for the mobilization of resources, as we've said, for brands, manufacturers, to invest in climate adaptation, not just mitigation. I've seen a few questions come in the chat, which I'm going to try to summarize. But can you explain a little bit more? This can be to any of our panelists, but about the gap in terms of resources, what is lacking right now and what is needed to actually move the industry further in this way.
I could start us off, Emily. What I see and what Becca had shared when we're looking at climate commitments of brands, it really is in that climate mitigation, decarbonization space. And the way I see it is a lot of the green economy and brand commitments is about how do we make money off the climate crisis? So it's essentially what is the market-based solutions with which we can benefit from the crisis versus what we are talking about here, climate adaptation resources, supporting workers, that costs money. And so to me, this is why as civil society, unions, labor leaders, we have to increasingly, first and foremost, humanize this conversation. And it starts both sort of bottom up, as Ayesha said, for workers, when you talk about heat, you get lots of testimony. When we talk about climate in a very esoteric way, it's very far away from their reality. But then starting to put on record through media engagement, also in audit reports, that whether it's fainting or exhaustion, that this is related to the climate crisis and not something isolated. So we're needing the storytelling and the data, but really for that to then boil up to get commitment commitments from brands as well as manufacturers on the climate adaptation side. And to that end, you'll start to see us beating that drumbeat more and more. You know, every brand that we evaluated this last year, there is scant attention to climate adaptation. And behind the scenes, when we talk to them, it's very clear because that costs money, and who's to pay for it. And to Ayesha's point, you know, there is sort of this history of colonization and reparations. That conversation has to happen as well, because if you get coolant systems in factories, but the transportation and the homes remain off the grids, again, you're not dealing with workers from their whole self. And I think really having a gendered lens to this conversation is going to be really important as well. And there is, as Ayesha noted, some of this research around gender-based violence and the harassment that women face during heat stress, and really tying that conversation forward. So from my mind, we're needing both the education and the work happening at the workplace level, as Ayesha pointed out, but there's a lot of education that's also needed from philanthropy, from foundations, from brands, because the conversation today on the climate crisis is really focused on the climate mitigation side, and we're not seeing capital flowing, no conversation happening around the immediate needs of workers. I'll turn it to you, Becca. I'm sure, you know, we've been doing a lot of thinking on the back end on what are some of the solutions that we're wanting from companies themselves.
Yeah, so well said. I think I would also add, and I think this goes beyond brands, it goes to the government level. Emily, you mentioned COP. I think there is starting to, in addition to this focus on mitigation, which is very crucial, we know this, and we're not taking away from that at all. There's an increasing attention being paid to this idea of the just transition, that as the climate crisis worsens, we need to upskill workers, have green jobs. But even in that conversation, this idea of climate adaptation is missing. The dealing with the here and the now, the impacts that workers are facing right now. And so, yeah, to echo what everyone has been saying on this call, we need attention and capital to flow to adaptation in addition and in tandem with mitigation and this just transition. And yeah, like to echo as well, that the climate crisis, we should see it as just exacerbating existing labor issues within fashion. This is not a separate or new idea. It's just exacerbating and worsening the current set of problems. And so a lot of the solutions that we've been long advocating for in the fashion industry, it's the same. We just need urgent action now.
Thank you.
There's a question here for you on, you know, what are some of the difficulties of training up workers in the context of Pakistan? Why is it so hard to get into the factories? And then what are some approaches that work beyond the workplace?
That's a very important question, Ayesha, because factory management would not allow these conversations inside the factories. I mean, that's not their concern. Their concern, even if when they would talk about sustainability or digitization of the machines that they use inside, the workers' lens is missing. So what organizations like Labor Education Foundation, and there aren't many, unfortunately, so what they do is they need to have workers outside the factories. So they have set up these legal centers outside the factories where workers would come and do these, capacity building of the workers outside the factories. So there are these proper trainings I can discuss with you. I saw a question in the chat regarding how we do the trainings. So the trainings basically start off on the very basic level. The workers are usually not very educated, the workers in the government sector. So they need to know what is climate. They need to know what is climate change. They don't know what does the word justice mean. So they need to know what does this word justice mean? What is climate justice? We need to tell them what are the impacts of the greenhouse gases. We need to tell them how have the human activities, when there is a flood, they say that we must have done something bad, that the God is punishing us. So something wrong must be done on our part for us to, expect this. So it's a difficult job here. And then we do in our training, we have a proper design curriculum at LEF. So when we give them this orientations, we have these sets of 30 to somewhere 35 workers, and it's usually a 2-day capacity building training for those workers. So they get to know what is the Earth's climate, what is global warming, what are the impacts of the greenhouse gases, and then we move on to the historical background, the industrialization, the colonialism, capitalism, the neoliberal times, how they have shaped the economy. And then we talk about how extractions, because we have these coal mines here. We have still some projects going on in some provinces of gas and oil extraction, and how the energy is to be consumed. So extraction, production, distribution, the neoliberal globalization, and it's difficult to teach them all these things. And then the relation of power and justice, and then just transition, because it's all the game of power. The capitalists have this power, so they've been, uh, they have the control over economy, they have the control over the capital, and then of course they have the control over climate as well. And rich don't really get affected by the climate impact. They have the air conditioners at home, they have the refrigerators and all those equipment at home. So it's the worker, it's the majority of the population that gets affected, and they don't even know. So in our trainings, we usually have the labor laws that touch upon we have the climate ministry, but it's not at all effective because we don't have the civil society or the labor unions who would ask for these things. So the relationship of what's the take of ILO on just transition? How are the global debts? They are impacting, because it climate is adversely affecting women. The debt policies are adversely affecting women. The tax policies are adversely affecting the women workers here. So women workers are, of course, we all agree that they're more vulnerable. So when we talk about the green jobs, we talk about all jobs, all sectors, and then we make sure that the trade union leaders that we have in our training sessions, when they get an orientation of what is climate change, they get an orientation of how they're going to lose jobs in future, when the factories are going to, garment factories are going to move towards lesser carbon emission, and the workers are going to lose jobs. So we train the trade union leaders to have this question as well. Earlier, they would talk about the other labor rights. So to bring forth this question of climate justice, and for them not to lose jobs, because there are few factories who are already closing big units. For example, 1,500 workers, they would close down one unit, and they would, shift all that to other machinery. So it has already started, and it's going to get worsen with the time. And we have made collectively with the workers, after many, training sessions, we have made these workers charter that would demand the just transition. So, and then we also talk about, we have the civil society members, the lawyers who are working on climate, the students who have this concern of climate change. So we make them sit together. We have started conversations around this topic for us to move together for having, more campaigns, advocacy campaigns in future. But the process is slow. We are very few in number. And of course, it's going to take some time. Yeah.
Thank you. Everyone, if we can please give a warm Remake thank you to our panelists for being here today. I hope that everyone can consider this call today a starting place in our learning. There is much work to do here, and you're going to hear on the call in just a moment about a few more educational programs that Remake is doing that we hope helps you build out this knowledge about these big issues. These are large and long game issues that together we're going to continue to work on. In the immediate, we do know that our worker partners need your support now. I'm going to turn it over to Ayesha B, who's going to share more about how Remake is mobilizing direct relief in this moment.
Thank you so much, Emily and Ayesha. So as Emily noted, we have always first out the gate been there since the pandemic. What we had done in the pandemic was nimbly launch a direct relief fund. What we do is we crowdsource small dollar volumes, take no fees, and get that directly to our worker partners at a time when need is really high. When we first launched the fund in the pandemic, it was with our partners Stand Up Lanka in Sri Lanka, because in the early days of the pandemic lockdown, many women were stuck in cities, couldn't go back to their villages, and we were able and had lost their wages. And so our direct relief fund was able to get medicine and food and supplies into Sri Lanka. Most recently, as some of you will recall, during the protests this fall in Bangladesh for the minimum wage, our workers faced wage disruptions, arrests, and injuries. Our direct relief fund went directly to Awaj. For those of you who donated to that fund, we'll be sending a report that Awaj has just put together with testimony and photos of how that money was used, which went directly to support women and children of families of 2 garment workers who lost their lives during those protests. The money was also used for medical expenses for workers like Joshna and Amirul, who were severely injured. This summer, what we are going to do with our direct relief fund is for it to go directly to the Labor Education Foundation. You heard from Ayesha Ahmad, who's a researcher who works with Labor Education Foundation. They do community-based education to teach workers about gender-based violence, the links to heat stress, also on their worker rights. All donations to LEF will go towards buying water filters for workers to have access to cool drinking water throughout the day, also rechargeable pedestal fans so that they're able to have some respite despite power cuts, and for coolers. This project and the relief will go across the factory base in Lahore and Faisalabad, and our hope is that our community will really show up and support workers during these extreme summer heat events. The other thing that we at Remake will do on the back end, as we've always done, is then reach out to other philanthropic foundations and also brands to see if we could get follow-on funding and support. I often think these issues are complex and hard, but with a degree of optimism, our community can move mountains. We're going to be in this fight for climate adaptation resources in the long run, but in the short run, here's something you can directly do. And I'll close this out with leaving you with one final quote from a worker that's a part of the LEF community who said to us, "It's so extremely hot. We cannot get up and drink water because we are piece rate workers. If we try and do anything about the heat, we lose money. The other day, 2 to 3 young men fainted because of the extreme heat. I felt so ill that my supervisor had to take me home." I'll turn it back to you, Emily. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayesha, for sharing. And we've dropped the link to support the Direct Relief Fund in the chat for you all, and we'll be sharing that out with the Remake Ambassador Slack and community widely. To close us, I'm going to share the floor with my colleague Allison, who's going to share how you can learn more about these topics that we've introduced today in the rest of the month ahead at Remake.
Hi, everybody. Can everybody see my screen okay? Perfect. Thank you so much, Ayesha A, Emily for moderating, Becca, and Ayesha B for the amazing call today. I know, it touched us all, and it's very impactful. So we'll be sharing the call, like Emily said, out afterwards. You could find the links in the chat. And before we close out today, I just wanted to say hello and happy July to everybody. And before we hop into programming updates, I wanted to celebrate some of our standout ambassadors that we've had this month. If you have an ambassador in your community that you would like to nominate, to be a monthly superstar. Emily's going to be dropping the link in the chat. You could just fill out that quick form. So to start off, Liz is one of our amazing Bay Area ambassadors, and she has recently taken the lead on hosting and putting together a fashion show in the Bay Area this year. She's put together an amazing group of all the Bay Area ambassadors who are into planning the event. This is the first year that we're doing an event like this in the Bay, and it could be very time consuming. And Liz has just been a champion at keeping everybody organized while bringing the community together. So thank you, Liz. Next, Gabriella, she has been an ambassador since early 2022, so she's been around for quite a while, and she has been phenomenal in raising up the Fabric Act in Delaware and working to grow this movement in her community. She is moving to the VP role of her University Sustainable Fashion Club, so snaps Gabriella, and she's very passionate about educating her fellow students on the fashion industry, fashion policy, and how they could make a positive change. And last but not at all least, Laura became an ambassador earlier this year, so she's relatively new, but she dove right into engaging with our Canada Hub. She's a slow fashion enthusiast and has a passion for community building, social and environmental justice, and also hosted a fabulous mending event, and has just been doing a great job at getting people in her community and neighborhood excited about secondhand and mending this no new clothes season. So if you know any of these people or you don't, but you're really interested in what they've been working on, they are all in the ambassador Slack and on the hub. You could reach out anytime. We are so grateful for you three for making our ambassador community so impactful. So let's give them some snaps and some round of applause. Next up, we have some amazing educational events coming up this month to continue to grow our advocacy power and our understanding around the fashion industry. On July 15th, we'll be having a teach-in for the Make Amazon Pay campaign, and we'll talk about the steps that you can, get involved further with the campaign. We'll learn why we're organizing across sectors through the Amazon supply chain, how Amazon ties into the international accord and the climate emergency, and what we can do to make ourselves and Amazon workers heard. During the call, we'll hear from Owen Espley, who is the UNI Global Union Coordinator for Make Amazon Pay, Alexa Raknova, who is the Senior Advocacy Manager for Remake, and Davina Bakshi, who is a humanitarian health researcher and journalist. That link is also being dropped in the chat, so you could sign up. And then next, like we've mentioned, if you're interested in understanding more and to deepen your understanding of the fashion scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, on the 25th, we'll be diving deeper into how brands and corporations are impacting climate from product conception to disposal. I will be joined by Remake community organizer in New York, Colleen Cochran and Becca Coughlan. They'll be sharing Remake's 2024 fashion accountability reports, their on-the-ground experience working with corporations to implement sustainable strategies, and how we can all work together to build a better fashion industry. For more information on these events, we also have a ton of in-person and other virtual events coming up this month. You can find them on the Ambassador Hub. If you have any questions about the Ambassador Hub, you can email the ambassador@remake.world email that's on the screen. And if you're not a Remake ambassador, you could learn more about our Global Changemaker program and how you can get involved in growing this movement on our website, or by clicking our website link that is dropped in the chat. So thank you guys so much for joining. I'm going to hand it on over to Emily to close us out.
Thank you, everyone. What an incredibly inspiring monthly community call. It's always so impactful to start the month with all of you all. We have shared a lot of resources with you today, which we'll be sending out after the call so you can understand how to stay in the loop and keep working and learning on these issues, as well as the research that we shared as well today. I want to send everyone a good luck on their ongoing No New Clothes Challenge initiative. We're cheering you on, and we'll be back with you same time next month. Take care all. Talk soon. Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.